Pilots and scratch builders, welcome to the Jetworks build series. In this video we'll be building the fantastic Blackburn Buccaneer, one of my favourites. Building it with a 20 EDF this time. So I'll be using 3M spray 77 during the laminated parts. First step is glue bulkhead 2 and 3 to the Bombay Doors, and then moving on to the plywood tower brace. Here we're just applying a small amount of Yoo-hoo. Whatever glue it is you choose to use. I need to try some different ones in all honesty. So onto the bulkhead number 3, just the tall ends, slide them in and just allow it to set. Again, just a small amount on bulkhead 2, just enough to give it a good bond. You don't want too much. Wiped away a little bit of excess there. Moving on to the lower brace. Here I'll just be adding a small piece of 3mm ply, just a spare part that I had lying about in the hanger. Just try not to get any glue in the slots. Next we'll be attaching that to the Bombay. So on the support piece, just add some glue and slide it into the slot. Next we'll be doing the corner reinforcers, and we'll be gluing it to one side of the fuselage assembly. So here I am with the Yoo-hoo on one side of the, in fact I'm doing both at the same time. Just small amount of glue, offer the two of them up together and give it a good rub so it's a nice even coating along the surface. That's the two parts done. Moving on to the lower part, the lower fuselage corners. Here I'll be using the 3M 77 adhesive. Very quick. Thin coat of glue. Spray it on. And then just as you're moving it along, just make sure you've got it in position. You don't have as much time with a liquid glue, but it's very good. Especially when it comes to sanding, you don't have rubbery joints and stuff hanging out the side. So moving on to the side panels. In this part of the video, it shows on the plans that there's a cut out just in front of the lower support at the canopy area. Doesn't show it in the plans, however I went along with it so that I wasn't coming into any issues later on in the build. Bulkhead number 1, small amount of glue, attach it to the front where the nose is going to be. Just test fitting the Bombay and the lower bridge support. Quite happy with how it fits. So again, small amount of glue on the tabs and the contact surfaces. Then just offer it up to the sides. Slide it into position. Just make sure it's squeezed right in to the corner supports. Next we're moving on to the other side and the fuselage inner belly. So just like we did on the first part, small amount of glue on the tabs and also on bulkhead number 1. Offer up the side and just make sure you slide into the slots, give it a good press. Here I'm using tape just to support it and hold it together just while the glue cures. That way I'm just making sure nothing pops off. I must try these pins. And then just at the front, bulkhead number 1, again a small piece of tape around the front. The belly panel inner, I've actually cut out the Bombay Doors there, but I've not cut fully right through. So here I am, just as there's a slight curve on the belly near the rear, I'm just sliding it across the table, just forming it just to get that bend before I actually attach it to the fuselage itself. Sometimes when you're laminating parts and offering them up, you will get the odd deviation, lump and bump, but just quickly use a razor blade and just trim it off. Offer up the belly panel and slide it back and forward just to make sure there's a good even coating of glue. Again, using a bit of tape, just holding it down. As there's, we've formed some curves in it, we want to keep it nice and tight against the fuselage. We don't want any spaces. And at the tail, just squeezing it together. Next, 3D printed tail air brake. This video I've used all 3D printed options. I love them. I think they're fantastic. It certainly helps speed up the build. So here I've used the tail piece itself and the hinges that I'm working on just there. I've printed them in PLA just so that it was strong. I wasn't wanting any failures, especially not in flight. I'll save that for the trees. And the air brakes itself, I've printed them in lightweight PLA. So with the small holes it's there, I've got a 1mm piano wire, in fact servo rod, push rod actually. I'm sure it's 1.2mm. But these ones are quite tight. I like to keep the front of it nice and tight. The back ones here that I'm working on, the brake itself, again the 1.2mm push rod actually slides in pretty well, nice and freely. I've cut it so that it slides into the brake itself and hides it so that I'm not having to trim away any later on in the build. Just pushing it through. Quite happy with the movements, everything moves nice and freely. And then the tricky part was the hinge. So once I had the hinge together, I actually used a small hobby drill piece just to drill it out a bit to make sure that the push rod slid through pretty good. Hooked it all up to the push rod, and then I attach it to the air brake so that when it gets to the point of epoxying the hinge to the brakes itself, I know they're in the correct position. So as you can see, I'm just closing it up there with the hinge in place. The pin slid out, that's how loose it is there. Not to worry, we'll take care of that with some epoxy later. So here mixing up a couple of spots of epoxy and hardener ready to apply to the hinge. Making sure that it's on the surface that attaches to the air brake itself. And just applying a tiny wee bit, being careful not to go over the edges. Less is more, so they say. Let's say, just being careful that it's all nice and neat and tidy. Push that pin back in again and just hold it close. So it's 20 minutes epoxy. I was holding it for a wee while before I decided to mount it up on the back of the chair. So on the air brake, sorry, the tail piece that holds onto the attaches to the air brake, again a quick spray with M377 adhesive, and just like that it's pretty much stuck. So we're moving on to the servo that's about to operate the air brake. Just setting it up with the radio and receiver to make sure that the servo's been centered. Get the servo arm and attach it. Here I was trying to figure out, making sure that it's closed first and foremost, and then when it's fully open so that I can understand how far it's got to travel before the air brake's opened fully. See here where the pins are, especially that one that was sliding out all the time, just a wee spot of epoxy on the end, and push it in. Using the same side of push rod just to make sure it's centered in place, and I'm just gluing the outside of it. So once we're happy that the air brake was all glued, just mount it up with the air brake stop. Pushing the push rod through is the pin for the hinge, connecting it all together. Unfortunately it's just off short there, but I've just got a spot of epoxy on the very tip. Quick operation, and you can see it's happy clapping open and shut. So they have printed off, designed and printed off, that one initially is a 45mm extension arm, and it works fantastic. However, I had to recenter my radio I had on my last Buccaneer for the Bombay Doors. I had them working at wasn't full operation. I think it was about 65, so I had to recenter it, design another one, and put on a 35mm extension arm. So they are just a wee bit yoo-hoo paw, attach a tailpiece, moving on to the sides and trimming away the slots where the EDF is. It's quite difficult to see. You may think that I'm just crazy and cutting away. However, I had pre-cut it with the template of the plans. And as you can see, it just pops off. There was a couple of edges that I just left so it was held in place. And then the same with the opposite side, pull that off. Here, the Spar bulkheads, 3mm ply. This build, I've used, again, 3D printed option. Originally on the first Buccaneer I built, I used the 3-ply, worked fantastic. So with Craig's 3D printed parts, I've never had an issue with any of them yet. So here, let's give it a go. On to some epoxy, mix that up. A little bit of yoo-hoo on the insides. Slide it in. Quite happy with the fit, and then just in with some epoxy in the centre just to hold the two spars closely together. We clamp just to hold it, make sure it's held nice and tight until the epoxy cures. Next step is the forward fuselage outers and the rear fuselage outers. Quick simple process. On the forward side, from the couple of tabs, it gets feathered out to the back, which I've pre-done prior to shooting this. So on with the rear supports here, there's markings on the plans that shows you where they should be aligned. There's a front. Again, we're using the 3M77 spray, so the quick spray, put it on, and it's stuck. Here we're going to add the 3mm light ply brace to the upper part. As you can see, I removed the tabs. Oh, and we're still doing the opposite side of the forward fuselage sides. So again, on the top, just the support parts that hold your wing spars, just a spare piece of 3mm ply. Glue that in and just leave it to set. And then we should be moving on to the Bombay reinforcers. Sorry, the Bombay end stops. So there's the forward and the rear end stop. Just measured it up. And unfortunately at this point you can see I've put glue all around the surfaces. Slide it in. So as I hadn't actually removed the Bombay doors, I was actually gluing them shut. Unfortunately, yeah, the Bombay was one of the things that I was really looking forward to. However, I've just glued it shut. Not to mention, as we go on here, while I'm sorting out the extension wires for the air brake, while I tidied that up, I actually taped it on the top and just got excited straight away and ended up covering it up and fixing attaching the top piece. So here's the extension arm that I'm putting in for the elevator. Sliding it under the EDF bulkheads. And this is me getting ready for the tailpiece. Tape that up and just mark it so that when it goes through the front, I know which cables are for what on the receiver. So there's the tailpiece, and we've just moving straight on to the top panel. As you can see, I'm just test fitting it. Eyeballing it up with the vertical stabilizer and where the cable is going to go for the elevator servo. Cut that out. There is a small circle on the plan, however I just cut out a wee rectangle just wide enough with a wee bit of space to hold or to let the extension cable pass through. Like I said earlier, now that I've glued the Bombay Doors shut, I was just carrying on and gluing the top. So here we are back to the canopy part, the pieces that I cut off earlier. I had a quick glance through the video and, sorry, the build guide, and seen nothing for it to, any reasons for it to be off. And I think when I trimmed, sized up with the top panel, I kind of noticed that, you know, there was certainly a gap missing. So now that I've smeared the glue all along it, and give it a wee spread out with a scrap piece of foam, just so it's a nice even coat. Line it up with the tooth at the front and bulkhead 1, and again using some tape just to hold things down. So onto the plywood spar bulkhead and the Bombay Doors, which we won't be doing, unfortunately. I'm pretty sure you'll understand how to fit hinges and a servo cable and a couple of arms to operate a double door. So apologies, guys. Next step, moving on to fuselage top, middle and upper, now that I've already put the inner on. So again, like the other pieces, what I've done is formed it against the table, just to try and get the curves and that in there before we put it on. And here, as you can see, I've just attached it. I'm holding it down. I've used the 3M 77 spray adhesive. I think it's fantastic when it comes to laminating. It's a very quick process. Here, just a squirt of Yoo-hoo at the tail piece. Again, forming it on the edge of the table just to get some curves in it, so that when we attach it, it's not actually trying to pull back. Again, hit it with a light coat of the M377 spray. Offer it up and lay it down, give it a good firm press, and it's attached just like that. Here we are just trimming out additional space just for the servo extension arm. Another quick press and I'm happy that it's stuck. If I was to use liquid glue, it would take a bit longer. Next step is the fuselage belly, the middle and the outer piece. I'm attaching that to the assembly. As you can see, there's unfortunately my Bombay Doors that will no longer be working. Test fit. Quite happy with that. In fact, it's not actually a test fit. As you can see, I'm rubbing it from the front to the back. I've sprayed that with M3. And it is pretty much stuck. Turning it over, just pushing it against the build surface, just so it's nice and firm. And in the outer panel, again, hit it with some of the M377. Reform, just to get that natural curve. I think the Buccaneer's got a fantastic shape to it. Low level bomber, love it. Unfortunately, I'll not be dropping paratroopers out of this one. Gutted. Anyhow, moving on to the 3D printed nose cone. We've already attached the air brake. Printed this in lightweight PLA. You'd be lucky if it's 4 grams maximum. Nose cone aligner. Wee bit of glue on that, on the inside, and then a good amount round about the outside of the surface on the nose. Wee extra touch on the nose cone aligner. Slide it into position. And then the upper bridge. A wee bit of Yoo-hoo, slide that in, and line it up with the nose cone. Next step is the canopy. Again, surprise, surprise, I have 3D printed one. So here I've lined it up to the nose bridge, and I'm just using a pen round about the outsides here, marking off where the canopy is going to be and the intakes before I actually get to shaping and sanding and things. Unfortunately, it's not quite as the build process goes, but it's just my thoughts and processes of how I build. So apologies if I've not stuck to it 100%. However, I have covered all options in here. So on the sanding part, as you can see, I was using a razor blade, just trimming away the sharp parts, and then used a bit of sandpaper, just a rough sand at the moment to smoothen it down. So onto the vertical stabiliser. I have the 6mm piece and the two 3mm pieces of Depron. Again, attach the servo just to make sure it's centred okay. Yep, happy that that's working. Most importantly, that the servo's actually working. So again, just on the radio, I'm just centering or resetting the travel on the elevator. In this Buccaneer, you don't need full throws on the elevator itself. Handles very well in pitch, so I think again it was maybe about 50-60% throws or servo travel I actually had on it. So I was just resetting it. Out with the 3M spray, just spray the 3mm side and attach that to the one side of the 6mm vertical stabiliser. Just attach the control horn and linkage stopper. Test fit it into the vertical stabiliser. I did a little bit of trimming just to make sure it fitted properly, and then offer up the opposite side of the vertical stabiliser with the 3mm piece of Depron. Small weight, just let it set, let the glue cure. Now we should be using 3mm light ply pieces. However, as you can see there, I've 3D printed them. If Craig's going to supply it, I'm going to fit it. Hook it up and make sure that your servo's running and it's operational. As I've twisted it up and down, there was a slight, not binding, but you can see it biting into the vertical stabiliser, so I trimmed it away. Now with 3D printed support, I'm just using a pen to mark out where it's going to be centred and just cut it out. A wee file on the inside. Here we are with some epoxy. Small dot of both, give it a good thorough mix. And then just apply it to the surface. I was actually staying away from the hole itself and then decided to put some through it. Unfortunately, as I pushed the centre rod through, it's going to pull some epoxy through with it on the end. So I had to clean that off. So using two boxes, I'm just centering the vertical stabiliser, making sure it's vertical, and that the carbon rod going through it is perpendicular at 90 degrees to the rest of the build. So on the original build I used 3mm ply for the elevator. However, 3D printed the lower one and the top part. They look fantastic, and I can't wait to see this in action. Now there is a slight curve, a wee bit of shape to them. Craig was getting all fancy with these designs. It looks absolutely stunning. So I'd offered it up and just marked it along the insides of the tail, just so that it was matching up to the bottom housing. I have trimmed away a small, it's not even 45 degree, probably about 30 degrees. You can see there, I'm just trimming it away with a razor blade, just a trailing edge. Offering it up to the bottom housing. And it all looks pretty good. So again, moving on to the other parts. We have the rod through it. It's been epoxied in, the servo's in. I've sized up the mount, and then once it had set, I looked at it and thought, how do I get this on? That's how it should go on. But so I was hit with a dilemma. Do I cut it in half and put it on and glue it to the top part, which should hold it? But sat, had a cup of coffee and thought about it for a minute. Then realised, fortunately, I've just used Yoo-hoo, so very carefully pushed the servo out, trying not to damage the vertical stabiliser itself, which worked, fortunately enough. Just remove the servo arm because there's no way that's going to squeeze through the bottom mount itself. It's certainly not attached to the servo anyway. So just adjust the cables, pulling it through. Move that to the side. And then magic it on, making sure it's in the right orientation. Squeeze the servo through. As you can see, I've got the control rod already attached to it. That was one of the reasons I decided not to cut it, as it's, you could say it's a structural piece. So reattach the servo arm and apply some more Yoo-hoo. Fortunately, I didn't hot glue it at the time. I try not to hot glue servos in that's difficult to certainly pull out or change should a servo go bad. And then with a wee bit filler, which I will use later on in the build as well, just where the support pieces go, just tidy that up. And a wee bit over the servo itself. And that will certainly help with when it comes to painting and overall finishing and stuff later. It is pretty close to level, as you can see. I'm scraping it on, but as I scrape it off, it's pretty much coming off. So again, just hold that up, make sure it's vertical, and just set it to the side. So a wee bit of epoxy here. Again, what I'm doing is about to attach the top part, the 3D printed part. The bottom piece there was printed in PLA, again just for strength. However, the top part is done in lightweight PLA. It looks fantastic. Now the build can be done just using 3 and 6mm foam like I did in the last build I had. However, when the option of using 3D parts is there, I'm certainly going to do it. Now with the horizontal stabiliser itself, again a wee bit of epoxy. What I've done is I've got a 6mm carbon fibre tube going through the centrepiece. I will be using a 4mm carbon fibre tube as well to run through the 6mm piece and then into the horizontal stabiliser itself. So just applying a wee bit of epoxy as well to where the fins, the horizontal stabiliser attaches to it, so that when I offer it all up, it all glues in one piece. I could have used Yoo-hoo, the intention was, however I had a wee bit spare epoxy there, so waste not, want not. So we're taping off the bottom side, just to make sure that the glue doesn't come loose. I've inserted the 4mm rod through one side and through the other. I've got little pieces of foam there that I've put in place just to stop the epoxy oozing out to the centre pole. And just set that to the side and let it set. 20-minute epoxy, won't be too long, and just again make sure it's perpendicular. So with this part, what I'm using is a bit of kitchen greaseproof, and just feeding it through so that I can get it finished off, so it looks like the full wing piece. Slide that through. The putty doesn't really stick to it that well, so just taping it on the underside, and some low tack masking tape, and then just apply the filler right across the top, just so that you're removing any gaps and trying to get as nice flat a finish as possible. As I say, the greaseproof paper will stop the filler from attaching to it. And that's it, pretty much done. Finished with the horizontal stabilizer at the moment. So next step is the turtle decks and the thrust tubes. So I do jump about back and forward in this video, so apologies for that. I have actually again 3D printed the thrust tube. I've got the 50mm fan inside, so what we've done is we've just attached the thrust tube, fed through the ESC, and just marking out where I'm going to attach it, so that there's a nice bit of clean air moving across it, and it's certainly not dangling about and getting a chance to get sucked into these awesome 50mm fans, because that would be epic. So just trimmed it out, use a pen, mark it off, get a bit of hot glue, and then just a wee bit on the side, the undersides, and then push it in, and then support with a wee bit additional round the outside. One worry is with the hot glue that if you're not got enough air across your ESC and it's not rated well enough for the motor, then that heats up, the hot glue heats up, and before you know it, you're soaking in ESC through your fan unit. So hopefully this won't happen. So while we're holding on to it and letting the hot glue set, just removing any of the strands of hot glue that comes away. And there's the front 3D printed insert intake, just attaching them. This is actually later on in build guide, however taking the opportunity to go with it. Back to the horizontal stabilizer. Yes, cause we're fitting it. So here again, now that the extensions in and the unit's pretty much sealed up, just again checking it. When I'm using extension rods, extension cable, sorry, I will put a wee bit of hot glue on the extension itself. You can get clips and things. I've run out of clips, so just using a bit of hot glue just to secure it, and then just poke it through that wee hole, pull the wire through, test fit. Quite happy that it sits in the slots, no problem. Although there is a wee gap at the front, but happy with that. Happy with how it is. It's looking fantastic. So just pull that to the side, and again mix up some magic epoxy. Now I'm using the epoxy to run right along the seam where the contact surface is of the vertical stabilizer and the fuselage. However, I will be adding a bit of hot glue. So at the front, certainly put the epoxy in there, and at the back, the tooth there, and down the seam. But be careful not to let any epoxy get into where your servo cable is. And then some hot glue in there. The reason I'm using the hot glue is so when it goes in, we do get a bit of a bite and bond to it while we're waiting on the 20-minute epoxy to be going off. So this part was quite tricky. As you can see, I have shaped and sanded the fuselage a bit. However, there is a wee bit of flat surface on the belly panel, but as we're lining it up, if you're pretty good in eyeball, you can see that the the vertical stabilizer does slide off to the right a bit, but I'm pushing it to the left so that when you look through it, it is set and it's set vertical. So I was quite happy with that. So onto the turtle deck. Now that vertical stabilizer's in, put the 3D printed canopy in place just to make sure that we're lining things up right. Get the inner turtle deck, spray it with the M377. Voila, stuck. You do get a couple of seconds, 30 seconds at least, just to slide it into position if you're slightly out. And then the next step is the middle. I was putting a wee slight curve on it because there is a wee bend in the fuselage there, so just to stop it from popping off. And then hit it with some 77 spray. Line it up to the rear of the canopy. I could have left possibly a millimetre there, because when I put on the clear canopy, it's quite tight. So onto the top part of the turtle deck, which gets feathered out. You might see a faint black line there where the pen was. However, you can see a bit there where it snapped when I was sanding it. However, bit of glue, you stick it down. It's fine. Like I say, when you're laminating parts with the M3, the 77 spray adhesive's fantastic. So we should actually be sanding, but I've done a wee bit of cutting and sanding, and as you can see, where there is some valleys, I'm using a wee bit of the lightweight filler, giving it the opportunity to harden, because I'm quite eager to be moving on to the next step, which is the wings. This was quite tricky. I remember in the first build it was a wee bit of a challenge. It was quite daunting. The Buccaneer was one of my first Jetworks builds. I love it. So I don't know if any of you have seen this before, but good old hand sanitizer. When it comes to the Depron markings, just use some of the hand sanitizer and just gently rub it, and it will take the ink away. A couple of dots, rub it in. However, it will leave your fingers green. Happy with that. So we moved the majority of it. So we have obviously cut the markings in the wing where the wing spars, the carbon slots are due to go. So here I am just sort of measuring it up, how much a rod actually needs, so that when I go to put it in, I'm not actually sliding it up against the EDF unit itself. So it's just in nice and slack, and then just use a wee bit of tape at an angle to mark it. Go and cut it. In this part we should actually be gluing in the rear spars and attaching the intakes, but as you can see I've already done the intakes. I've glued the spars, but just moving on to the nacelle covers, I've actually added the small strips, top and bottom, 5mm foam, just to hold the nacelles itself. So offering up a 3mm piece of foam just to the bulkheads there, just to measure it up and get it lined up in place. You can use a sheet of paper, but that's double work for me, so I like to use a piece of foam that I intend to use in the build. Put in a small piece of carbon spar with a sharp point, so that when you offer the nacelle up to the side, it pushes into the foam so you can see where it's due to actually go. So we've got the wing spar, put in the wing spar there just to try and size it up and see what it's like, but in all honesty it was getting in my way, making a squeaking noise as it was rubbing off the foam itself. So we actually just get that out the way and remove it. Attaching it. So a wee bit of hot glue along the top of the wee formers that I've made, and just offer it up and hold it till the hot glue goes off. Don't worry if there's any lumps or bumps, and we'll take care of that later in the filling stage. So once you've got the top side done, turn it over. As you can see, I've got an excess there, so just squeezing it against the fuselage and marking up where I think it'll probably meet up. However, I'm giving myself a couple of millimetres additional just so that I'm not left short. Bit fiddly. So again, moving it around, another wee trim there, marking it up to see where I think it's going to go. And then on the nacelle, at the intake part, just using hot glue, couple of millimetres at a time, just to secure it so that we do the first part, let it set, and then do another 4 or 5 millimetres, offer that up in place and just hold it with thumb and finger till it goes off. And in that way we know we're, from the leading edge, from the front, the intake, we've got a nice shape. And then fold it over to see how much excess I've got, because the front's already held, and just sort of eyeball it and mark up what you think you have and what you need to get a good fit. As you can see, it's a wee bit rough there. The blade wasn't the sharpest. So again, just offering it up. Get a sharp blade this time for a nice clean cut. Just a small relief for the servo wire there. But it's looking pretty good, happy with that. At the front, could be doing with a wee bit of shaping. So yeah, just trimming away for the intake. And again, just another wee trim. It's looking pretty good, but like I say, once it's stuck, you can hide your imperfections with some lightweight filler and a bit of sanding. So with the hot glue gun again, a wee bit of yoo-hoo around the outside, because it will be moving back and forward, and the last thing we want is a one-stop shop with hot glue and it getting missed. Let's push that into place and hold it and let it set. Do the same with the opposite side. Yeah, there is a couple of gaps there, but happy with the shape and how it looks. Nice clean transition. Good on both sides, so carrying on with the wing. Again, it's quite tricky with the servos, with the hinges and the two rods itself. So just marking up where the servos are due to go, where the servo arms will be. I've got the 3D printed hinges that Craig's provided as well. This is the first time I'm trying these. So just marking on the wing plate where they should go. And I've just moved along, shaped them all, cutting out the spaces. I have left maybe a millimetre each side. It's not an absolute tight fit, because obviously I like a bit of movement. Once the epoxy's set, look pretty good. Push them in. Yep, happy with the test fit. I will be mixing up a wee bit of epoxy. I think I already have actually, and then just putting them in and allowing it to set. Now on to the exciting part. I'm using a fair amount of epoxy here. I think it was about 18 to 20 grams. I mixed up one big batch, and the intention was to do it all in the one go. However, in doing that, unfortunately, what I should have done was did the underside of the wings, glue it upside down. As you can see, as I usually do, I tape off the holes in the wing plate for the spars, so that I can fill it with epoxy and make sure it meets out to the edges of the control, out to the edges of the surface, so you get a nice absolute clean finish. However, I'm actually going to get a nice clean finish on the bottom of the aircraft this time. So on the tips of the wing spars, slide them into the support, couple of boxes, and then I had to try and find a couple of books just to make sure it was all nice and fit and level. And of course I'm trying to not rush it, but do it as quickly as I can because it's 20-minute epoxy. It all kind of slotted in pretty well, and I'm taping up. The fronts didn't have time to do it all, unfortunately, and use some additional epoxy on the tops like we usually do. Taking time to smear it off and get that nice finish, but I'm sure it'll be nice enough. We'll finish off, it'll be lovely in the end, but the processes remain the same. And remove the excess tape so that we're removing excess epoxy if you've got it there, and allow it to set. Moving on to the wing thickeners, just trimming it, making sure it meets up to the fuselage and the wing plate, and it looks like it's in place all right. These are feathered off from the inside going out. A wee trim there as well. Offer up, quite happy with the fit. And then we're going to hit it with the M377. But first we'll just take a wee 45-degree angle, just so that it gets up as close to the fuselage as possible, just to removing as much gaps. So with the 77, quick spray of that, offer it up to the wing plate, stick it down, slide it into place, and the aileron extensions. On the underside you can see, well hopefully you can see, I've got absolutely fantastic clean finish with tape on the epoxy surface. So here we are attaching the control rods and the servos to the ailerons. Test fit works, happy with that. Servos have been centered. And just line it up as best as you can, nice and flat, and then tighten up the servo arms. Looking good, pretty much close to finished. Fantastic model. So here we are, time for a thrust test. Checking the surfaces, all the surfaces are working fine. Let's see that brake. Awesome. Looks fantastic. Throttle armed. Right, let's try it. So just holding it, I'm actually holding it just behind the CG here. Just a bit, well, just over half throttle, and it was pulling up, so there's a good bit of thrust. Moving my hand forward to the CG area, just over half throttle, and it's holding its own, so yeah, she's going to fly well. Punch it. Yep, plenty of power. Fantastic. It's going to be a great flyer. So this is about it, pilots. Good luck in your build. I hope to see more Buccaneers hit the skies. Apologies about jumping back and forward in the build guide. And here we are, jumping back to the Canopy. So yeah, so we've got the clear Canopy from Craig. They're superb. On the cutouts, I'm using the Canopy top from the original cutout of the not the belly panel, the top panel. And what I'm doing is using that as the base for our cockpit. So I've had a piece of foam, put the 3D printed cockpit on top of that foam and cut round it very, very closely. Hit the canopy top with some adhesive spray, and then slide the canopy base on top of it. That'll stick nice and firm. And there we go, we've got a cockpit ready to go in. I will attach two magnets, one at each end, but it's a very tight fit, just like that. So a couple of 3D printed pilots, trying it out, sizing it up with the windows where I think they should be. There's their heads rolling about, a couple of seats, wee binnacle for the front, control panel in the wrong place. We'll move that to the back seat and give the pilot something to look at instead of the back of the seat, because he's the one dropping the bombs, even though I've not got a Bombay Doors. So just marking out seat, pilot 1, pilot 2, seat, just so that when it comes to cutting it, I know where things are going. So taping it off, and we will be attaching the canopy with Yoo-hoo Por, just to make sure no excess, because it will spill out. There's a wee canopy with a couple of crazy pilots in it. Trimmed out clear plastic canopy, and force it on. You can see a small bit of glue oozing out as you push the canopy down, but that's why we've taped it off. So pilots, don't forget to fit the refueling nozzle. Thanks for your time watching this video, and I really hope to see some of your builds of the Buccaneer as well. Pretty soon we'll be finishing up with the tape with a nice paint job. Thanks again, pilots. Big thumbs up to Craig and his design. Superb model. Yes, there's a bit of filling to do, not my favourite, but as soon as the filling and sanding's done, I'll be able to get to painting it. Jetworks Build Series Buccaneer.